Welcome, everyone. My name is Celia Pavelev, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at the Australia Council for the Arts. And it's our 12th session today, where I'm once again your MC. I'd like to acknowledge the Camaragal peoples, the traditional owners of the land from which I'm coming to you today. And I'd also like to acknowledge the many nations throughout Australia that we are gathering from here online once again to talk about our cultures, platforms, and adapting digitally, but with a focus on marketing today. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge all First Nations peoples present and online in this session. And as I said a few seconds ago, it is our 12th session in this series. It's hard to believe, but we have had a season change, as Joseph just reminded me, since we first met Joseph, actually, way back when it was much warmer, as he comes to you from the Gold Coast. But today he's going to be talking about digital marketing. So before we get going, our usual housekeeping that we like to address. We've got the Q&A box down the bottom, which if you'd like to post any questions throughout the session, we'll be talking to Joseph throughout his presentation today. So send those questions as soon as they come to mind. There's also the chat box also to send questions through. We have closed captions if you are available through Zoom by clicking on the closed captions icon in the bottom of the menu bar. And our session is also interpreted through Alyssa and David, our Auslan interpreters, throughout today's session. So I think we'll get going so that we don't lose any time as our guests are still coming through the gateway there. Joseph previously joined us in episode 3, where he walked us through the thinking behind the merch desk and the reasons behind its creation. But today, Joseph, who is currently Head of Digital for TEDx Brisbane and Head of Pay Per Click at Click Media, is going to be taking us through digital marketing, which is on the tip of everyone's tongues as we head now into a land much more driven and online in that platform. Over the years, Joseph's roles have led him to meetings with the head of Google Search in Silicon Valley, coaching digital marketing courses for the General Assembly, and consulting for hundreds of businesses, not-for-profits, and social enterprises across Australia and internationally. Today, Joseph's going to be exploring how to get started, setting goals and outcomes, finding your audience, looking at different platforms and ways of distribution, return on investment, and he's going to throw in a few case studies of successful digital campaigns along the way. Don't forget, there's a poll in the bottom menu that is really super easy to fill out and going to assist Joseph in tailoring today's session. Over to you, Joseph.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And also congrats on 12 of these. That's just insane. These have been, so good. I've tuned in on the other end, being a viewer for a few of them, and incredibly valuable. Really enjoy them. And I'm stoked that we've got the interpreters from Auslan here today, or Auslan interpreters, sorry. That's very exciting. So today, 40 minutes is a bit of a obscure time for a lot of digital marketing talk. It's not quite enough time to really get into, the content that you would normally be covered in an 8-week course. But it's also too long for me just to be talking to you all here. So I really encourage everyone to ask questions throughout, particularly if they're relevant to the areas that we're talking about at that time. We'll have some times for question and answers, hopefully at the end as well, for things that may not directly relate to what we're talking about in these slides. But my goal today was basically looking at some things that I've taught in person before, some talks I've given at conferences before, and trying to condense it all into a few really simple rules that I hoping are going to be relevant to 100% of everyone watching today. So before we dive into that too much, I wanted to give a little bit of background on me outside of the wonderful introduction that Celia gave. And this is more than anything to give a bit of an insight for people who are looking to potentially get into digital marketing, not just for themselves, but as I'll go through in a sec, I actually got into digital marketing trying to save up for amplifiers and recording. So I actually came from an arts background, and while trying to actually fund one of my passions, I kind of stumbled across another. So I started my career actually working operations side for an online store. And what that means, it's really just a nice way of saying I packed orders into cardboard boxes when they came in. And at the time, like I said, I was saving up for amplifiers and basically recording studio time. But I ended up, really discovering that passion through that job. I could see how much of an effect digital marketing had when it was done well and when it was done poorly. Like many businesses, when it's done poorly, it can be the difference between having to lay off staff. A lot of the time that's casual staff, and some of the time that's, full-time permanent staff if it's done really poorly, which brings back that human element, which I think is so important to be aware of. When, with digital being such a numbers game, so often we talk metrics, which are, I'm so passionate about myself, but it's really important to also have that experience and that background where you understand that, aside from the metrics and the KPIs that we set ourselves, a lot of this is going to have a major human element. So after basically discovering this passion, I ended up taking it to a digital agency where I dove headfirst into basically trying to learn all of the things that I did not have a clue about. It was very much one of those say yes and then work out how to do it that night. So I would be up all night trying to learn and teach myself the ways to do basically the things that I'd agreed to, the project that I'd signed up off for that morning. So it was a really interesting time, but also an incredibly valuable time. And it didn't feel so much like late nights and, no sleep, because it was something I was passionate about. Between website development, SEO, Google Ads, email automation, the list goes on. But I guess, between, the way I was raised to kind of question everything, and, the passion I had for it, I found myself kind of committing to that self-education more than I ever had at university or school, which I think is very important for anyone looking to get into digital marketing, which we'll go through in a sec. But there is really some pressure on self-education. And yeah, we'll delve more into that kind of hurdle shortly. Fast forward a few years, and like Celia was saying, I've consulted for hundreds of businesses and organizations, learned thousands of lessons, often the hard way. Some highlights was going to Silicon Valley for me, got invited to one of Google's global conferences, managed to, have some small table meetings with the heads of Google search, which was just, a crazy experience. And just doing sessions like this, actually coaching. I've done some coaching for General Assembly, which some of you may have heard of, but if not, they're basically a global training organization. I've done some private coaching and consulting before, and I get a lot out of that, just because, as we'll talk about education in a sec, there is a lot of misinformation out there. And unfortunately, it's one field where tertiary education often really falls short. And yeah, we'll explore that more in a second. But, one thing to make clear from the start is that's not criticism of tertiary education. It's more so the nature of digital marketing. It's constantly changing. And the idea of trying to teach accurate and current knowledge for something that may have changed last Wednesday is really challenging. It's something I can't imagine any university trying to take on and being able to effectively deliver. So there are benefits and challenges, which I wanted to go through to start with, because this is what really, even on my worst days working in digital marketing, I still love what I do. And I think a lot of that is because of these benefits of digital marketing that I keep coming back to. So apologies for anyone sitting in the audience if I'm telling you how to suck eggs with these benefits and some hurdles in a second. But I think it's really important to get clear at the start, because these are all areas that actually feed into our goals and what good digital marketing actually looks like. So to get started, let's talk the benefits of digital marketing. Again, these are the things that even on my worst days as a digital marketing manager, when absolutely nothing is coming up Millhouse, these are the things that really bring me back and remind me that, you know, of all that is good about digital marketing. So first of all, it's transparent. Incredibly transparent. Whether you're, and I'll have to look at the poll results in a second to get a better idea of, you know, who's out there today. But if you've done any form of other advertising, paid advertising or marketing in the past, it can be incredibly hard to see the results in real time, but also even in review, even if say you did a huge campaign, it could have been letterbox drop, it could have been door knocking, it could have been a billboard, you know, the month before. A lot of the time, no matter how we look at that, a lot of the time, the effectiveness of those campaigns still comes back to a hunch. It still comes back to us going, okay, well, this is one of the factors that were affecting everything to do with our business or our organization last month. We saw an uptick, or we saw, you know, a fall, we saw a drop. And we try and kind of attribute what worked or what didn't work to these different areas. With digital marketing, there's no gray area. We've basically, or very little in comparison, we basically have the ability to see, you know, how many clicks this campaign got, what the effectiveness of those clicks were. So how many, from those clicks, how many people actually called you? From those clicks, how many people have filled out forms? How long did they spend on the site? You know, we can delve into that data to a much greater degree, and some of it, you know, starts getting a little bit scary. How much data really is out there that we could analyze, but it is transparent, and that's really, really important difference between that and a lot of other traditional forms of marketing. It's accessible. This is a really important thing that we often overlook when it comes to digital marketing compared to a lot of traditional forms of advertising. And that really feeds into a few different areas. So for instance, there's just very few barriers with so many platforms and apps out there that offer either a free membership or credits when you first sign up, or all kinds of things. It's very easy to kind of enter the race when it comes to digital marketing. There are a few of these benefits which are really double-edged swords, which we'll get into in a second. But one thing I do really love about digital marketing is how accessible it is. This afternoon, a lot of people listening, if you wanted, you could start a marketing campaign. A lot of you would be equipped to, you know, push out a message across Facebook, send an email campaign. So there's lots of people who are doing these things. And it's very easy for someone who potentially hasn't got a background even in marketing to get started tomorrow or get started today. Now, jumped to there. It's effective. And this really kind of ties into the first point a lot. Now, because our campaigns are so transparent, it really does mean that we can be more effective. If something's not working and we can see in real time that it's not working, we can, rather than say a TV campaign or a billboard campaign or who knows what, where we kind of look back 2 months later and say, okay, all that money we spent didn't work at all. we can see it in real time and go, okay, well, rather than running this for 2 months, we can see 2 days into the campaign that it's not working. So let's stop, let's pivot, let's change the way that we're approaching this, and let's do it better. And evolving. Now, this is a really important note when it comes to digital marketing. Because it's evolving, it means that it's much harder for larger companies to monopolize channels. Digital marketing is changing constantly, and while things in a certain area of digital marketing may only change slightly in the space of, every 6 months or a year, overall, with all the different pieces of the puzzle, we see massive fundamental changes to digital marketing on a yearly basis, if not shorter amounts of time. And for people who are looking to get into the industry, this can be a huge benefit. The same turbulent landscape that makes it really hard for you to create what's called a set and forget campaign, the kind of things where you would go, oh, I spent heaps of time learning about digital marketing 3 years ago. It's fine. I know what I'm talking about. That can't really occur in digital marketing. As someone who works in digital marketing, to pay the bills as my daily job and my passion, I would assign hours every week just to education, so that I know that, the actual advice and what I'm doing is up to date, current, and accurate. So those are all the benefits, and these are all the things that kind of, while there's probably 1,000 other points that I could say that I love about digital marketing, these are the things that it all kinds of ties into. Now, the hurdles. This is what, the flip side of that. And interestingly enough, the hurdles kind of all stem from the benefits. And that's why I mentioned the double-edged sword before. So first of all, competitive. Because digital marketing is so accessible, it is an incredibly competitive landscape. There are so many examples of this that we see all the time. For instance, example that we were looking at the other day was the number of live streams that we've seen artists push out during the COVID lockdown. Now, live streaming on Instagram is an incredibly accessible channel and medium for artists to, push their art out there. Having said that, the same things that make it accessible meant that over this period, we kind of saw a flood of different artists live streaming. Now, I personally loved it. I was catching as many as I could, but those same artists that I love, I saw, their view rates and their engagements drop off over this period. The same kind of rule applies to a lot of different areas that we need to look at, whether it's email marketing, advertising, text marketing, all kinds of things. We need to be aware of, saturated spaces. And it becomes really challenging for each and every one of us to stand out in those areas, because the same thing, again, that makes digital marketing accessible also makes it competitive, and in some cases, incredibly saturated. Education. Now, this is an area I'm incredibly passionate about. Once I finished fixing a lot of things with the merch desk, we get all the artists on the planet to move to a more sustainable merch model. Education's the next thing that, we're going to push the team to fix, because there are some serious issues with digital marketing education, not only in Australia, but around the world. First of all, there's a huge issue, and in the same turbulent nature that, makes it great for new people coming in, it also makes it really hard for newcomers to try and educate themselves on digital marketing. As someone who's written courses before, it can be really challenging to find that balance between teaching what is a hands-on skill, being able to go, okay, in this video today, I'm going to spend 20 minutes teaching you how to set up a Facebook campaign, and balancing that out with what I believe is far more important, which is the ability to think digitally. Basically, the ability to adjust and adapt as new tools come out. I think it's far more important to equip each and every business owner, artist, arts organization with the abilities to adapt and understanding the fundamentals of digital marketing. Having said that, I've had friends, I've had colleagues, I've had so many people reach out to me in the past who have graduated different tertiary levels of tertiary education that have supposedly majored in digital marketing. And the same things they learned 3 months ago was not relevant. It was not accurate. And it was, you know, assessment based on a platform that hasn't been used in 3 years. And I do truly feel for a lot of people trying to write tertiary education syllabus. With the amount of red tape that would naturally come with anyone holding a university status, I can't imagine trying to write syllabus content that is up to date and accurate, and being able to get it through that red tape at the same time. So it can be incredibly hard to get started. Celia.
Is it more that about the headspace that you approach the knowledge of digital marketing rather than having the piece of paper, such that in sort of to encapsulate everything that you sort of said, it's that you need to be aware that you're never going to know everything at any one particular time, and that it's constantly evolving, as you've said, because at that point, if you go into it with that space, you've always got a little bit of room to learn a little bit more rather than it being already full in there and having to relearn something. But if you keep a little bit open all the time, it can continually.
Yes, no, that's fantastic observation. I think it's that. I think it's also, I mean, my mindset is, you know, if I go into hibernation for 6 months, I will know nothing about digital marketing other than the fundamentals. And I think, you know, having that understanding, you know, and knowing that, you know, the fundamentals do actually make up a lot of it. And some of the sections we'll go into shortly will, I've tried to basically condense a lot of that into 3 takeaways that if everyone takes away from today's webinar, I'm really hoping we'll see some better digital marketing decisions out there, even if it's just from the people on today's webinar. So again, education's a really big one. I do feel for anyone trying to get in this space, sometimes it's a matter of just getting your hands in, getting your hands dirty as they can get working on a computer. Yeah, just trying to learn whatever we can, but also accepting, like you were saying, you know, the way that I do it today may not be the best way, and it will definitely not be the best way in 6 months from now. Now, this brings me to the last thing, which is a huge factor, and it's something that I always hear from people who are looking to get into the industry, or even people who may come from a marketing background who are looking to expand their skill set when it comes to digital. And that's that it's overwhelming. The big thing is that in the digital space, there are thousands of platforms, thousands of tools, thousands of channels and ways to go and grow digital. And while there is no single right way, there are a lot of wrong ways to do digital. So that brings me to the real crux of today's webinar, which is what not to do in digital marketing.
Before you go on, Joseph, the question box, what platform, pages or courses do you follow or recommend to stay up to date, just before we leave the education point?
Fantastic. So there's a lot of free education offered by a number of major platforms. So for instance, Google, if you actually search, there's a combination of their digital garage program. There's also some Facebook just marketing free programs. The most important thing that I'd say is that with all of those bits of training that are offered by major platforms, I always take it with a pinch of salt. I've got in the past, as part of, the work that I do, I've had to get, quite a number of certifications through Google. And that comprises of, a number of like online tests. These could be multiple choice tests and all kinds of things. And obviously there's some learning to do before that. But I think what's really important to understand there is not take what they say is the right answer as the perfect answer. We need to look at the fact that, as Google is a business, Facebook is a business. The more clicks, the more advertising dollars that are thrown behind them, that's better for them. So more often than not, what the course of action recommended by those courses will be is cast a wide net. Target as many people as possible who hit X, Y, Z. And a lot of that time, it would fall into what I would consider to be shotgun advertising. It's, very, very wide net of advertising. It's looking at, just capturing as many people as possible, knowing that a very small percentage of them will convert and do what you want them to do. So while those things are out there, and I highly recommend that everyone should take the time to educate themselves on them, I would not take what those courses teach as concrete. And that's again, looking at what we're going to touch on in a sec, which is looking at, how to really start from an approach, how that approach should start and how it shouldn't start. So hopefully, if that didn't answer your question there, Celia, hopefully it will in a second. So this is probably, it looks like, a very boring slide, but this is probably the biggest mistake I've seen any artist, any organization, most small businesses and some large businesses make in my entire digital career. And it's, it's really scary. At the start, it could be the difference between, where you put your time as a sole trader. But I've seen it result in tens of thousands of dollars wasted for larger organizations. It's a really important lesson to learn. And if you can learn it from other people's mistakes, then you've just, hypothetically put a few, $10,000 in the account. So what this really comes down to is, I guess it stems from people making statements like, I need a website, I need an app, I need an Instagram. Rather than looking at having a website or a Facebook or a Snapchat or a blog or anything like that as a tool rather than a goal. So the difference there, and it may sound really minute, but it makes a massive difference both at the start when beginning your path into digital and down the track. And it's just a good habit to get into. It could be the difference between, starting at the very start on the drawing board saying, we want 200 more customers this year. We want 1,000 more trial signups. I want 1,000 more monthly listeners on Spotify. Now, starting with statements like that and goals like that, the difference is we are now objectively questioning every single platform that we use to achieve that. And I guess where this really, it ties into a couple of points in a second, particularly when it comes to websites, which I do want to go into a little bit because it's something that I'm constantly asked about. But, really just questioning and actively questioning what we use and what tools we use to achieve goals, rather than necessarily starting out in the digital space and saying, we need an Instagram, we need a Facebook, we need a Snapchat. People are telling us we need a Vimeo. And that is unfortunately a problem that happens all too often. As you get down the track and past that kind of startup stage, at the point where you're looking at potentially even outsourcing some of that work, one of the biggest challenges I've seen, and this is where it can get really costly, is if you come to an agency or come to a freelancer or just any form of external business and you start with setting those tools as goals, what happens is you end up potentially spending very large amounts of money on things that aren't necessarily what you need. For instance, if you go to a web agency and say, I need a website, the problem then is that you may get a website. In fact, you probably will, but that website will not necessarily do what you need it to do. If you go to a digital agency and say, I want to increase, I want to increase my signups by X amount, and actually have that as a goal, you've actually also formed a KPI. Now, regardless of whether you're outsourcing this or doing this internally, it's probably the biggest point that I would make to any business, any artist. Just start with goals rather than saying, I need to get a email marketing happening. I need more email automation. I want to post more on Instagram each week. And while they may all be the things that you end up doing regardless, it's important to start with those goals over tools. It just makes such a huge difference long term. Now, the next one, and I'm sorry this image isn't in higher res, but I just love this as an example so much. I'm a huge fan of the DIY house design fails, and this is a fantastic example of it. Now, from the transparency that we mentioned earlier as kind of one of the biggest benefits of digital marketing, it's not automatic, and that's really important. And again, other than the lesson about, make goals, not tools, if anyone listening right now is a website owner and they don't know for a fact whether their analytics is installed correctly on their website, and preferably Google Analytics, as soon as this webinar is over, do that one thing. For me, do that one thing. The transparency, it's not automatic. Google Analytics is free, it's easy to install, and it's the best way to track how many users are coming to your site effectively. If you go and install it today, you don't have to look at that data today. You don't have to look at it tomorrow. You don't have to look at it 2 years from now. But every day that Google Analytics is not installed is a day you will never be able to review data from. So it's really, really important. Even before you're spending money advertising, even before you're doing anything. I've worked with so many, even not-for-profits and social enterprises who wrote a blog article 2 years ago, and they had no idea that they were actually getting, 200 people each month coming through to this blog article. They just thought it was, like anything else. They weren't getting any traffic through to the site. Without analytics, we can't find the low-hanging fruit. And so that's so important for anyone who's a website owner, but also just, if there are any other opportunities within your organization and there's a choice to track it or not, I would say generally track it. Even if it's something that you never look at, if you end up, later down the track talking to someone like me, we lap up all that data. It's gold to us. It makes all the difference, and it could save you so much money and time and energy down the track. In the next slide, this means you go check you have analytics installed correctly now, but after the webinar, preferably. Now, the last big point that I wanted to make actually takes back to a very old proverb. Some of you may already be aware of this one. If a website is built in a forest and no one is there to see it, was it really the best use of those 60+ hours? Now, this really falls down to, I guess, what I see happen a lot of the time, and more often than not with artists and arts organizations, where they don't start a website with those goals. And I think it's really important both for, when it comes to valuing both your own time and valuing the goals that you have for yourself and your organization, understanding what you want to get from a website. The website, or any website really, can be the most powerful tool in your arsenal. It's not limited in the same way that, say, Facebook or a social media platform is, because it's not built for 100 million people. It's built for you, and you can design it for you. But a lot of the time, the challenge that comes with that is that that same freedom can kind of get us stuck in the mud. And particularly if we don't set out those goals from the start, you can kind of, deer in the headlights, get, I guess, overwhelmed by all the different bells and whistles and opportunities and forget the stuff that actually matters. This brings me, the follow-on or summary of this is build websites to be found. This is something that is often a really hard conversation for me to have with a lot of artists in particular. And sometimes that's because there's no one necessarily searching for exactly what they want to offer. So this probably, more so than anything, refers to when we start looking at, arts organizations, or, even social enterprises, businesses, sole traders, anything like that. If you have something and you know that people are actively searching for what it is that you do, then we really need to ensure that the website is built to be found. Now, I could spend, another 40 minutes boring all of your socks off talking about SEO, and, on-site SEO, off-site SEO, the do's and don'ts. But I think the most important thing as a general rule is to really understand what you want from your website. If it is basically an expensive business card that you just want to send to people, that you're already in communication with, if it's something that you're going to pass off, that's fine. It's a very, very expensive business card. Even the freemium options end up being very expensive down the track in other ways. But yeah, I would say if it is something where people are actively searching and you want to be found, it's really important that you are choosing the right platforms. It's important, as a general rule of thumb, that you have written content on your website, which is something, again, which is very hard for a lot of artists who want to have a portfolio website, which is all imagery, all videos. And I guess the other thing that I'd say on that that's really, really important is understanding what people are searching for. So there's a number of tools you can use. There's a tool called Google Keyword Planner. Personally, I hate it. They broke it a few years ago. It used to be a fantastic tool. Now that is free though. But for, I think it's like the equivalent of, maybe $10 AUD for a heap of credits that you'll never run out of. You can use a software called Keywords Everywhere, which gives you access to basically a tool that runs off Google. It gives you accurate search volume and recommendations on what people are actively searching. It's a really valuable tool to understand before you start building websites, and even in the messaging you use and other forms of digital marketing. It's really, really valuable because by using a tool like that, you can actually both phrase, if you're running ads, you can phrase your ads using the same terms and queries that people are actively searching for. If you feel like your organization or what it is that you do is an answer to someone else's question, it's so important to understand exactly what they're asking, not what you think they're asking, because more often than not, you are not your target audience. I'll say that again, you are not your target audience. So it's really important to use tools like that, understand what people are searching. And if no one's searching for what it is that you do, that's completely fine. It just may mean that you need to approach how you do things a little bit differently. But again, if someone is searching for what it is that you do and you want to be the answer to that question, it's really important that from the outset, when it comes to website development and all kinds of things, that we're smart about the way that we choose platforms and design websites. Celia. Sorry, you're still muted there.
Sorry, still mute. There's a few people listening today who are in the middle of building new websites for their organisations. Lisa Miller from the Australian Ballet School says how relevant this is. And Will Priso, who I think has been with us almost every session. Will, hello. Also saying that it's great stuff. If you could give one more piece of advice for someone who's midstream developing their website at the moment, what would be another golden takeaway rather than building the most expensive business card that they can come up with? Because that's brilliant.
Sure. First of all, please don't hate me, because if you're mid-build, I don't want my photo going up on the dartboard. But if you're building on Wix, stop it straight away. Stop it, please. Please stop it, please. It's a platform that's pushed to artists. It's a platform that's pushed to small businesses. Unfortunately, it's a platform that also spends all its money marketing. And none of its money actually building a good platform. So for instance, if you are building on something like that, just really do your research as to what's out there. There's a lot of website platforms that market themselves as free, that as soon as you actually are at a point where you're making money from it, it will stop being free and start being very expensive.
Another question from an audience member is, what do you think about the third-party software like SEMrush to analyze competitors and create strategies? And do you use any software in particular? And someone else has asked, will we be sent a list of the suggested resources at the end of this, because they've been listening so intently and not written down some of your advice?
I can definitely put together a list of it's just a list of, my Chrome extensions currently installed, basically. So yeah, I can definitely do that. Sorry, what was the first question again, Celia?
Sorry, yeah. Now, what do you think about third-party software like
SEMrush? Yep, perfect. So SEMrush, for those of you who don't know, SEMrush is basically a tool built to analyze both your website for kind of what it was predominantly built for originally, was analyzing your website for on-site and off-site SEO. Lots of third-party softwares are built with a single purpose. And, a tool like that where it works really, really well. And they started with that unique selling point at the start that they do really, really well. Eventually, though, what happens is that they get a lot of bells and whistles add-ons. And SEMrush is an example of a software that I love. I've used it a lot in the past. But what I would say is that, unfortunately, the free version of it, which is what the majority of people use because it's actually a very expensive piece of software, the free version of it gives wildly different results to the paid version. To the point, I feel like it's almost misleading results to encourage you to upgrade the account to, see the full set of results. But surely they wouldn't do that. That's unethical.
Another couple of questions. So if not Wix, then what would you be recommended that isn't an HTML interface? And perfect. What about a platform like, is a platform like Squarespace better?
Great questions.
God, it's rush hour in the question box.
That's all right.
May not get through everything, but yeah.
That's all right. I'll answer them as fast as possible then. Squarespace. Okay, so first of all, my personal go-to for basically everything is WordPress. For those of you who haven't used WordPress, WordPress is an open source platform, which means that the actual software for it is completely free. And it's also something that has, because it's open source, if you have a problem, odds are thousands of other people have, had it before and they've coded solutions to it. The biggest problem with WordPress is that it gets a bad rap though, because a lot of the time it gets used incorrectly. A lot of the time people use add-on softwares, which in the back end are called plugins. And they use way too many of them. They're kind of like Band-Aid fixes. So, it's all right to maybe use a couple or a handful of them, but like I log into some client websites and go, why is this taking 30 seconds to load? And they've got 200 plugins installed in the background. It's like, seeing someone who's actually covered head to toe in band-aids rather than fixing an actual issue. So that's the big thing. If you're smart about WordPress design, it's hands down the best platform for anyone who is, a service-based industry. And I'll put in the resources as well at the end, a theme that I recommend. So I think it costs maybe $50, $60. There may be a free version as well, but it gives the same drag drop functionality that people love on other platforms, except it's faster, it's better for Google, it's just better. And again, that was through, making that mistake 1,000 times before on 1,000 other themes and other platforms. Squarespace is a big love of a lot of designers. The problem, and I think it's very hard to make a Squarespace site look bad. And a lot of my designer friends hate me for criticizing it. However, the challenge for it becomes when you try and optimize beyond the kind of SEO optimization and marketing that is built in to Squarespace. It's really built to make a lot of these things easier for you. But if at a later date you want to kind of, take it to a really advanced level, it's near impossible to do. Other than that, if you don't want to get that advanced, Squarespace is fantastic, but again, potentially more expensive than WordPress.
And so I think, Cecile, that might have answered your question very beautifully. Fiona asked, what is the WordPress theme called again? And then I've got another question after that about content. So we'll whip over to the content after that. But what was the theme called? Was there a name? Does it have a name?
I didn't mention it before. I'll put it in the resources. The one that I typically use is a software called Flatsome, Flatsome. The real reason to use it is because the actual software is built on something called UX Builder, which is just an incredibly fast drag and drop builder, which, without boring you too much in the details, most of those drag and drop builders that you see are written, the actual code behind them is written in such a way that it's almost impossible for Google to understand what the page is about. So, it's kind of like going, okay, well, it's easy to make, but Google will never understand what this page is about, so it'll never get found. So yeah, after much searching, we found that, and I love it.
Great, thank you. So how important is it that the written content for the site is unique? Someone once said that you should not copy text on several pages. Is this right?
Completely. The question is, do you want this page to show up when people Google XYZ? So let's say you have a page that you want to rank for green teapots. And, do you want it to show when people search green teapots? Yes, then it needs to be unique and it needs to actually have the phrase green teapots on it. More often than not, I guarantee there'll be at least someone who comes away from this webinar who was questioning why a page wasn't ranking. And when you actually look at the content, more often than not, the actual term that you want it ranking for isn't on the page at all. At the end of the day, Google is incredibly intelligent, but it is still a bot. And our job from an SEO point of view is to, more than anything, make it as clear as possible and as easy for Google to understand what the page is about. So if you're making it harder, or when it comes to duplicate content is something that Google looks at as that is something they associate with dodgy websites. Dodgy websites have broken links. So if you have broken links, they penalize you. Dodgy websites have duplicate content. So if you have that, they'll penalize you. It's basically Google wants to ensure that dodgy, spammy websites are less likely to show in the results. So that's a huge part of, how the algorithm works. A lot of people in my job try and make it sound as complicated and like black wizardry as possible, but it's really honestly mostly common sense.
Is it important to get on that front page of the Google search? And
when was the last time you looked on the second page?
Ooh, tricky question.
I think there's, there's all those, I mean, I myself excluded, I wouldn't consider digital marketers to be very funny people for the most part. But, the jokes amongst them is things like, if you want to hide something, put it on the second page of Google. It's incredibly important. If it is something that you think is relevant, and if you think that that traffic is likely to take the action that you want. So for instance, going back to the green teapot example, if all we did was sold green teapots and we, knew that people searching green teapots for sale was, there was 300 people a month. We used the software I mentioned before called Keywords Everywhere to look it up and see how many people were looking at it. I'm sure there's not that many, but hypothetically, if there were, it would be vital to our business and our organization to make sure that we were ranking as high as possible on that front page. Is there any other questions popping up there in the chat? Sorry, Celia, you're on mute again.
I'm so good at that, aren't I? No. We're good with the questions now. We'll let you get back to the back to your presentation.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's basically the wrap up on the presentation, but the key points being seriously go check that analytics is installed correctly on your website. Now, if there's a tool I'll put in the resources as well, which if you're trying to add these as we speak, it's called Google Tag Manager. It is or Google Tag Assistant actually is the one that we want for this. Tag Manager is another thing I'll put in the assets. Google Tag Assistant is something you can use to basically, as a Chrome extension, just to see on your website, what's installed, what's working effectively. It may be something that's installed that hasn't actually been set up correctly or installed correctly. So it may be, double counting visits or all kinds of stuff. So it is important to make sure that the data is accurate. And it may not be something that matters to you for another 3 years, but at that point, in 3 years' time, it's going to be worth its weight in gold having that data.
I was on mute again.
That's right.
If I had $1 for every time I was asked this question, I would be very, very rich. New audiences and attracting and building and maintaining and reaching new audiences. Applying traditional marketing theory and methods gets you somewhere and in some way, shape and form in the digital landscape and through the digital ecology.
Yeah.
But how do you do it quickly, effectively, and how do you keep those audiences, and who are they? How do you find them? How does that answer that question when someone poses that to you?
It's a great question. To be honest, it probably sound like a broken record here, and I swear I don't have shares in their business, but Keywords Everywhere or whatever the keyword research tool is, and that may change a year from now. There may be a better tool. But I always start, trying to find what questions people are asking. At the end of the day, Google is, incredibly successful business, but they are a question and answer box. And we need to really come back to that. I know it's very easy to get distracted by all the bells and whistles of Google and think of that as anything else, but they are a question and answer box. So if we are the answer to someone, we need to work out what they're searching. And if they're not searching, we need to understand better who they are and where they'll be. There are so many amazing channels and strategies out there and tools that Google released that never really make it necessarily into the mainstream of digital marketing. And a big part of that is not necessarily because they're not accessible. They really are. I mean, the really advanced things that, we could implement with a business that has, a 50K monthly marketing budget. The same campaigns could be launched by someone who, has a $50 monthly budget. It wouldn't be as effective, but the actual channels are very, very accessible. but there are so many things out there. So if people aren't searching, it's, you know, the next step is to look at, you know, how do we capture them? But the biggest thing I say to any audience, and this probably refers a little bit less to artists and more to organizations, but is if you are the answer to something that people are searching and you're not already, you know, capturing that audience, that should be step one. They're your low hanging fruit. They will convert and take action faster and better and cheaper than any other audience you could ever possibly approach. So the first step should always be capture the people who are actively searching for the solution that you're offering.
What if you're an artist for the very first time, coming out there with your first website, or your first putting yourself out there for the first time, putting it out there? How do you find those people the first time? How do you find what they're searching for, or how do you tell them to search for me, for the little green teapot, when they may not know that that little green teapot is out there?
Yeah, no, great question. So this is where all marketing, kind of, particularly digital, kind of falls into three major categories. It's push marketing, pull marketing, and nurturing. So pull marketing is where, you know, someone's actively searching for what I do. And it's me just making sure that I'm there when they're searching. Push marketing is, you know, me going out and, you know, making sure, like, just kind of, you know, approaching nearly anyone or approaching people based on XYZ to market to them. And nurturing is making sure that, you know, once they've interacted with me, I'm following up. I'm making sure that, you know, when they're ready to buy, they're buying with me. So just, you know, that there is going into push marketing. And push marketing is more expensive when we're talking about advertising, but it also typically has a much lower conversion rate. And the reason that's important to know is that even if we're going at like a grassroots level of digital, even if it's something where it's very manual, we've got to be ready to get a lot of pushback when it gets to push marketing. So for instance, if I was an artist and I knew that my music sounded exactly, or not exactly, because what's the point if it sounds exactly like, but it sounds similar to, you know, Of Monsters and Men, or it sounds similar to 80s David Hasselhoff, who was very, very popular in Germany for some reason. I would then go, okay, how do I capture those fans? Because I know that they want what I've got. They just don't know I'm here yet. So at that point, it's really a matter of finding, if we understand who that audience is and really, really understand. And what I'd say again is we want also, you know, some proven history that those people really do love the product. It's just a matter of, you know, getting it out there. There are products, and it does still work. Sometimes it's just very, very different how we do it. The thing I always say to clients is, at the point where we're looking at really doing push marketing, because it is such an uphill battle, it's so important that we have got all our other ducks in a row. It's really important that we know that, you know, the product we're pushing is 100% ready for the audience we're pushing it to. Because otherwise it's just even more of an uphill battle. We want to be 100% sure that we've got anything else that we need to capture that customer when they come along the line. And I say customer, it could be a fan, it could be, you know, someone looking to, you know, give you a government grant to record your first, you know, EP. It could be all kinds of things. So it's really important that we kind of just, you know, are aware of who the audience is. And then there could be 1,000 different ways to target them. It could be a matter of advertising on YouTube, a video that only goes to dog lovers, people looking up videos to do with dogs that, you know, are also between this age group and this demographic, and they're unmarried. And we may find that that's the perfect audience. But yeah, it can be challenging to find that. And also it's so important that we have all our other ducks in a row beforehand.
Cool. Thanks, Joseph. And one very last question to end on, because it is 3 o'clock, and I do promise everyone that we finish as close to time as we can. Help is the first word. So how do I know if analytics is installed correctly? We have a nervous attendee.
Google Tag Assistant. I'll put it in the resources, but I would log into Google Chrome as your browser. I would add Google Tag Assistant, and then you basically, as simple as going to the website. I mean, I'm not sure whether you can do a private chat or something, but we can, I can check it for you in 30 seconds. It's not a stress. There are lots of ways to check it, but it is really just, it's a really valuable thing to have.
Thank you, Joseph. So I think that winds up our session for the day. That was so incredibly interesting. And you're right. It's one of those topics that we could talk for hours and hours and unpack and build back up again. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Alyssa and David, for interpreting all the way through. Thank you to our guests who have joined us today. Don't forget, Australia Council has many offerings during the week: Creative Connections, First Nations Roundtable, and our research webinars. Thank you to everybody on the Facebook group who posts questions for us to ponder so that we can come back to you with another panel of interesting and very generous insights into our world. I think that's about all. Send us any questions that you would like to digitalsolutions@australiacouncil.gov.au. Thank you again, Joseph and Alyssa and David and Renee in the back. See you next week.
Thanks so much.